The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Before the feast of Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to pass from this world to the Father. He loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. The devil had already induced Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, to hand him over. So, during supper, fully aware that the Father had put everything into his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God, he rose from supper and took off his outer garments. He took a towel and tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Master, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing, you do not understand now, but you will understand later." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "Unless I wash you, you will have no inheritance with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Master, then not only my feet, but my hands and head as well." Jesus said to him, "Whoever has bathed has no need except to have his feet washed, for he is clean all over. So you are clean, but not all." For he knew who would betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." So when he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I, therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. In 1833, Alfred Nobel was born in Stockholm, Sweden. He had several brothers, and by the time he was 9, his family had moved to Russia, where they had private tutors, and quite honestly, they received an excellent education. They were engineers, they were scientists, they were technicians. As you may or may not know, Alfred went on to invent dynamite, but he also had more than 350 patents to his name. 20 countries had corporations and laboratories that he founded. He wrote poetry. He wrote drama. He seriously considered becoming a professional writer and not a scientist. When he was 33 years old, one of his brothers passed away, and the newspaper thought he had died. And so Alfred got to read his own obituary in the newspaper. And what struck him was this, that the newspaper gave him credit for inventing the most powerful destructive weapon humankind knew up to that time, dynamite. Bothered him. He did not want his legacy to be associated with violence and destructive power. And so even though science had been what sort of earned him his fortune and his reputation, there was another cause very close to his heart that few people knew about, and that was the cause for peace. And so he took his rather substantial fortune and donated it, used it to establish gifts, prizes, for those whose advancement in areas benefited humanity, especially in the area of peace. Few people probably are aware that he invented dynamite. But everyone has heard of the Nobel Peace Prize. He was not happy with how people were going to remember him and how they were going to understand him. How do you want to be remembered? What would you like to see written about you in your obituary? When I was a freshman at De La Salle High School, Brother Humberto Diaz Delgadilla, in our religious education class, gave us the assignment of writing our own obituary. So I did. And I got an A-. Brother's comment on my paper was, I did not say enough good things about myself. I've not fallen into that trap again, that's for sure. Straight A student from this point on, I'll tell you. But how do you want to be remembered? And what would you like your obituary to say about yourself? In a very real way, I think tonight, and what we are about tonight, and what we get a glance into tonight, is how Jesus wanted to be remembered. On his last free night on earth, how he chose to spend it. He sort of, if you will, wrote his own obituary in bread and wine, in water and a towel. I mean, we sort of know pretty well how he wanted to be remembered, and the church knows it very well, because every time we gather, it gives shape to our liturgy and our worship. We take bread and we take wine, and we remember how on the night before he died for us, this night, he took those elements and said, this is my body which will be given up for you. This is my blood which will be shed for you, the blood of the new and everlasting covenant. When you do this, remember me. We know how he wanted to be remembered. In that bread, in that wine that becomes his body, and in his blood. That we would never forget the depth of his love for us that caused him to go to the cross. But then we come to the gospel tonight, John's gospel, where, as you may have noticed, there is no bread, there is no wine. There's water and a towel. There's washing of feet. Interesting, don't you think, that on this night when we remember the institution of the Eucharist, this is the gospel the church proclaims throughout the world. John's gospel was written about the year 90. It was the last of the canonical gospels written. And by the time it was written, everyone reading it from Matthew, Mark, and Luke would have been very familiar with the church's ritual about bread and about wine and remembering Jesus. The problem was that while people were receiving the bread and the wine, remembering Jesus, piously and having profound experiences, it wasn't affecting their life. It wasn't changing the way they lived or how they were in the world for the most part. What they did here, when they got out there, did not remain close to their heart. And so John tries to provide another story, saying, you have to do this in remembrance of me, but then, as I have done, you ought to do. See, one of the amazing things about Jesus was that I think he was so powerful in his presence and attracted people in such a remarkable way because what was close to his heart, he lived out of that. It was on display every day. Every value that he had rooted in profound divine self-sacrificing love was seen every day. And the difficulty was people had a hard time with how dramatically, how powerfully, how overwhelmingly he lived what was important to him. It never took a back seat No one would have ever mistaken him for something other than who he was, and that caused a problem. And so there you are with him on this last night of his freedom, and he washes feet. His last night of freedom, and he does the work of a slave. We talked about this on Palm Sunday. How do you make sense out of a God who is your slave? That's awkward. That's uncomfortable. What do you do when God actually embraces and embodies what he's been preaching, that the greatest become the least? If that makes you go and go, ooh, that's kind of odd, then you're in good company. Look at Peter tonight. His friend Peter, yes, his friend. At this point, I think the disciples were also very close friends. I mean, let's face it, he knew it was his last night. What do you do when it's time to say goodbye to people? You gather them around. You share a meal, always lovely. And then you try to decide, how do I show you how much you mean to me? How do I express that to you in words and in actions? And Jesus' heart kicks into overdrive. He had loved them, he had loved his own in the world, and he would love them to the end, and it drags him to his knees. His love for his friends is so powerful that he needs to express it. Words aren't enough. He has to do it in action. His love enables him to serve them as a slave, and it blows their mind. You're going to wash me? Oh, my feet? Stay away. We don't know how weird that is. There's something very intimate about feet. No one gets near them, right? Let's put some nice shoes on them, cover them up, make them look good. I understand today that there were a whole lot of pedicures going on, you know? People getting ready because got to be as presentable as possible tonight, right? It's an odd kind of thing. And Peter's like, whoa, what is going on here? And Jesus' answer to him is essentially this: if you cannot understand how I am loving you in this moment, with this action, with this symbol, with this expression, how will you ever comprehend what's going to happen tomorrow? How will you ever comprehend what I'm going to do for you tomorrow? That's how Jesus wanted to be remembered. And remembered in the truest sense of the word. Not remembered as in, oh, that's a nice story from long ago, but in remembering in such a way that it shapes even now. That we say, oh, what he did is wonderful. And I'm going to let that change how I am in this world. That I'm going to bring that close to my heart. Receiving Eucharist is only part of what we're called to do here. Sharing it as he did in humble service to others is what comes next. And our foot washing takes many shapes. It can be everything from wiping the runny nose of a child, to changing the sheets of the elderly in a care home, to driving your neighbor to get groceries, to making a call to someone whom you know is lonely, to comforting someone who is at a loss in their family. The list is endless. But any time that act of service is underscored and brought about because of love, he had loved his own in the world and would love them to the end, then it is foot washing. And that's so important, because so often this night in this gospel is about service. Fine. But if you read John carefully, it's about the power underlying service and what gives it eternal value, and that is love. If you take the love out of service, then service becomes extraordinarily burdensome. And the focus tends to fall back on us and how much I'm giving up and how difficult this is and how hard this is. But when it remains empowered by love and the focus is on the other, that's the definition of foot washing. And so tonight, we as Catholics do what we as Catholics do so well. We put into action, we ritualize the truths of our faith that we are called to serve. We probably, in the other 364 days of the year, never really wash another person's feet. Probably. But tonight we do it, if for no other reason than what Jesus did, to symbolically demonstrate to ourselves and to each other our willingness to not only do this in remembrance of Him, but to follow His lead and do as He showed us. I know that it's an intimate moment. It often is. And people become kind of squirmy and uncomfortable with the fact that someone else might be touching their feet and washing them. So, just to say it again, I know. Feet are ugly. They just are. Every single foot in this place is unattractive. Ladies, you've got a chance for somewhat okay feet. Guys, we're just, it's done, it's over. I mean, we were born, it was like, ugh, just over with that. And every year, there are excuses. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, I'm wearing nylons. Oh, my feet stink. Oh, I've got an ingrown toenail. I've got this, that, and the other thing. If we can't serve each other and allow others to serve us, I'm not sure we're understanding what this is and what we're called to do. So this evening, as we've done in years past, every single one of you will have the opportunity. We're not going to force you, but everyone is welcome to come have your feet washed and to wash the feet of someone else. If we can't do that here where it's safe, I'm not sure how we will ever do it out there. If you need help removing your shoes or your socks or getting from your seat or getting back to your seat, we have people here who are ready to help with that tonight. It's a way that they can serve as well. Tonight, we remember what He did for us, and we follow His example. As the Master and Teacher has done, so we do. I invite those who are manning the stations to please come forward.